It made sense anyway.
Oh, all right. Well, good morning. Hopefully you're having a good start to your day and a good end of your week. And I'll apologize for my hair. Hopefully it's not a huge distraction, but it's getting. I'm always thinking of Doc on Christopher Lloyd in Back to the Future.
Oh, back
you know, or when he was the crazy guy on Taxi as well.
You look just like him.
Yes, I got that down pat. Let me get some comments up here. But yeah, no, that's. I have a little too much fun with those things, but man, we are. I guess we missed 2 weeks, right? Missed 2 weeks, and so we're back. We're together again. I'm gonna make sure I keep you in the. I got you all. There we go. Get you centered up there. I had you off frame. But anyway, we're glad you're back. We're still in the story of God. We're moving through this. We've talked about creation, and then we talked about something that again the world kind of does away with. There's this fall thing. There's this sin problem that has to be dealt with that stems from this beautiful thing God created, which really is us. And this first part of what we're going to talk about today, we're now moving into covenants. And there's an introduction, and then there's several chapters. We're not going to make it.
No.
I always try to claim, we're just going to roll right through those, hit the high points. You can't do it. You simply can't. I was reading a post online, and it really was talking about how that to interpret Jesus in the New Testament, to look at the New Testament and what Jesus says about things in the absence of the Old Testament is the foundation for misinterpreting the New Testament and what Jesus said. And that really is a lot of, we seem to be facing a lot of, I'm going to call them so-called pastors and so-called theologians that just don't want to work hard and don't want to study and don't want, and really don't want anything other than what they say to be the gospel. And that's a huge issue we face in our churches. And so I encourage you, wherever you're at, and I encourage you here in our church all the time, because it's the way I was brought up. Challenge everything. Challenge what you're hearing about stuff, but go into the challenges knowing that you might be wrong. You could have a wrong position, and find out for yourselves. Dig into the Scripture, and don't be afraid to go, I'm falling short of this, and I'm going to need God's grace to work through this issue. Or I saw this in Scripture, now I'm mad about it. I'm mad the Lord's pointing out my need for Him, but I'm going to need His grace. He's going to offer His grace to help me out, and those are I encourage folks to do that. But today we're going to talk about covenants. We've got an introduction, which I thought was really good.
It's really good.
And really some key points. Now, so let's talk about today. I've been trying to do this right out of the gate, in case you got to go somewhere, in case you don't have a lot of time. The important parts of what we're going to hear about today.
Okay.
And really it is this. Let us not forget who God is. And this has kind of become a recurring theme in all the studies, and the Bible studies I'm doing. Who God is and who we are. Those are vitally important. And we can see it in the covenants. And I marked this down in the introduction, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes. All of the biblical covenants originate and are sustained in God's gracious love for creation. That is, when we think about the covenants, I think a lot of times we think about the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. We don't delve into all of the covenants He made in the Old Testament, and we just want to sustain ourselves in the New Covenant that He gives us in the absence of understanding the others. And I think that if all of these are done and sustained by Him, why do we not look at what they say? Why would we not try to glean something? Because they're demonstrative of His great love for us. So that's part of what we want to look at today. So those are the two important parts: who God is, who we are, and especially in light of covenant relationships. And I thought this was great. We do not start or initiate any of the covenants.
That's right. God always comes to us.
And so that is a beautiful. A beautiful thought. I'm going to start off right here. This is one of the key things in understanding who He is and really who we are. And the first sentence of this introduction says, the story of the Bible So let us not forget the story the Bible tells is one of human rebellion and divine redemption.
Mm-hmm.
We should
over and over
again. So we should not forget about that. It is a redeeming God.
That's right.
A redeeming God who seeks sinners with the poignant question, where are you? Going back to Genesis, that first chapter. I am telling you, the more we get into this, I've read the book a couple times now. I'm studying it more as we go through and prepare for these weeks together. And the more I'm falling in love with this book over and over again. His beautiful writing, and I love the thread that he keeps pulling us back to that common thread that he's talking about, this redeeming God, this loving God. And let us realize that, man, why does he love us so, and what is he doing for us? And then this, I think, is also key in understanding who we are, who he is. We humans, later on it says this, and I marked this, we humans are creatures who can both seek God and flee God, who can cooperate with God or rebel against God, who can reflect upon God or categorically deny God. We humans are those creatures who exercise the power of conscious choice, which is perhaps the greatest evidence of our otherness from God, which really should remind us that we're not God.
We're not God.
See, no. God is God. He is the I am, and we can, and we see it more and more. We can go back and forth between all these things, and really anything.
And with this, the way he put it here about we can accept him or we can reject him, we can do this, we can do that, but always, no matter where we're at in this relationship, he is always seeking us. He is always coming to us. Come, let us reason together. He never just says, I've had it.
That's a great way to put it, too. Come, let us reason together.
Yeah.
I think too often we don't want to reason with God.
That's right. Yeah.
We don't mind coming. We don't mind coming to him, but we certainly don't want to have him deal with us.
Yeah. What'd you say?
Yeah, and that's a problem both inside the church and outside the church. But yeah, such a great thing there.
And the thing is that he created us this way. This is the way he wants it. He doesn't want a bunch of robots that'll just go.
Yeah.
He gave us this freedom of choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
A God of love that we can just say no more. I just reject you.
Yeah, I'm done with you today.
I'm done with you. But he's never done with us.
Oh yeah. Well, and he looks at us.
He'll let us go on in our folly and really get into trouble.
Oh yeah.
But he's always there, always ready to take us back in.
To bring us back into that right place. I think it's kind of like when you watch the kids. You'll sit and stare at kids like I do in Sunday school a lot of the time. Just what are they going to do next?
Yeah. Right.
And that is I don't know. I can kind of guess where they might be going. But the Lord kind of knows. He watches us and he loves us and cares for us.
Yeah.
When we're doesn't matter where on that scale we're at, he is always seeking after us and always caring for us. Yeah. So great.
But I
great
get
importance.
a hint in this from the author. He kind of intimates that God is omnipotent. God is omniscient. We know all the omnis, and yet somehow he's learning from his experiment with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
He can be surprised, I think.
Yeah. He does it through the whole first chapter with the about Noah and God's covenant with creation is what he calls that covenant. The author does. He intimates, as he said there, that he's watching us, and yet there's some fine line between him not knowing what we're going to do and him being surprised by it, or him learning, kind of, what will they do? And I kind of look at it, all three of my boys are wildly different.
Yeah.
And they each have their own personality, and but how'd that happen? Tate and I, we know who we are, and we would have figured out we'd make three smaller versions of some blend of us, and we didn't. We see things, and sometimes their behavior surprises us, how they respond to something. This is the same way God looks at us. Does it change who we are as parents? And I think that's the important part.
Yeah. Even
though he might learn through what we're experiencing and see how we're experiencing things, it does not change who he is.
Right.
And it does not change his thoughts about us. There is that, and then later on in chapter 10 is where he says we're going to find out a little more about where, if you're not careful, you'll tilt that scale a little more and make him where he doesn't know anything. And that's wild there.
It's just.
But this you already mentioned this. I've got this highlighted here. God is not a manipulator of us.
Right.
He beckons to us. He calls us. He seeks us. That is who he is. A little bit of the background I thought was important for us to kind of get. A lot of times we got our own ideas and understanding, but it's been a lot of years since I was in school for some of this stuff. But covenants came from the Latin. Co, together, veen, meaning come. So we come together.
Right.
And that whole let us reason together statement that you made there. In all of it, that God initiates. It says to say that God is a covenantal God is to suggest a divine interest in our cooperation, a divine commitment to partnership, and a divine power that is empowering and affirming of the other. That what I want to say there is, and this is maybe it's just me today in most of my life, but in society today, this word affirming is all words are being taken over by different people and what they want to mean.
Yeah.
Affirming here is affirming value, existence. It's not affirming what I decide to be the truth and not what God is. Right. And so that's he empowers and affirms that who we are as his creation, as his, which I think is wildly important. As much as my kids may and they've not done it, thankfully, but parents sometimes experience this. Kids wander off from their parents. They don't want to be part of the family. They don't want to know anymore. They shake their fist at them. Yep. All of that never changes that you're still mine.
That's right.
And I think that is part of the empowering and affirmation from God, is that we are, no matter what we say, how we think, and how we live our lives, he's still God, and we still are his creation.
That's right.
And that actually is part of what I think beckons to some folks to realize that in the midst of all their misery, much like the prodigal son, nothing to offer, completely ruined his own life, and yet he recognized that his father was still his father.
Yeah.
He could go back and beg for a lower position or whatever. He didn't have to at the end. We all know that beautiful story.
Yeah.
But it's the recognition that I still know who my father is. Him going and squandering his goods did not mean his father was back home squandering things.
No, that's right.
There was still plenty, if you will. I also have marked in here, and I'm trying to check highlights on yours as well. We highlight. I underline and Ramona highlights. What else have you got on there on that first page that I've missed? Or you saw you're on the other page there. I'm sorry. On the second page there, I've got here this comment. I want you to know what you think about this. The story of the divine grace is what we're about to talk about. And I've never thought about. Had you ever thought about covenants as a story about divine grace?
No.
I had never connected those two thoughts.
No.
But again, this is kind of the way he wants us to think about it. He kind of anchors our thoughts here with a very simple statement. The story of divine grace, that is, of God's stubborn and persistent desire yet to love and redeem this fallen creation in the history of covenants. And I just thought that was a beautiful thought. And then he says, they're grounded in grace, not in ourselves.
Yeah. And
I just want to, I think that's, again, so vitally important is for us to realize that it is, all sustained by God's grace and his love for us. And so that brings us, unless you got something to add there, into Noah's covenant with creation, is what he says, God's covenant with creation as seen through Noah. And boy, howdy, we asked that question. I'm sure you've got it highlighted as I've got it underlined.
How could a loving...
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, you read that question.
How could a loving, caring God destroy everything in a flood, including all those innocent children?
Yeah.
And we keep asking that question all through.
Yeah, it's phrased differently.
It's the same question. How could a loving God?
Yeah, it is always the creation questioning the Creator.
Yeah.
And so, but again, I think this is sometimes a problem. There are people who aren't trying to be mean, much like Amy here, as he says in the story, not trying to be, but really desiring to know,
wanna
seeking
know.
to know.
Seeking
And I
to
think
know,
too
yeah.
often we as Christians spend our time reinforcing what we already think we know rather than digging into the scriptures and really addressing the questions that people in sincerity are bringing to us, and we don't want to answer. We just want, you got to trust God. You got to, or and not really taking time to go, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. Now, I'm sorry, when I think about the story of the flood, I think about all the sinful people. I don't think about the innocent children.
Right. Right.
But
But they were innocent children. Yeah.
But so we have to kind of reason.
We have to reason.
We think, well, hold on a minute. So there were no children on earth, huh? If you're gonna, and so now that brings, and now it suddenly starts challenging other thoughts that we have, other firm beliefs, and so I think that's where it behooves us to answer the question, and so he does an attempt here, and I think a very very good job of helping us address this through looking at the covenant with creation, and but again, having walked this whole story of God, we're going to look at this and this question without ignoring the rest of the book. Without ignoring all that we walked all the way to this question, feeling good about how we think about God and who He is, and now, if we're not careful, we have to throw all of that away to answer it in a very poor manner. So, I've got this. Oh, good, you do too. Yeah, same thing. I'm talking a lot. So why don't you read for us? And I'm going to pull this up on the screen for just a minute. Where are we at here? First
Talking
Peter.
about this First
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah. Well, let me get First Peter pulled up, and that way they can follow you along as you read that. First Peter chapter 3. And then I'm going to go to a little split screen here. I think I've got. Hold on just a minute. Oh, there it is. And I can switch that over there. This is going to be down here in verse 18. So I'll scroll this, and you can read this for us. We're probably going to keep this view up for a while now today. Get down here, roll. All right, here we go.
Okay. The book of First Peter, which includes a mysterious and most controversial passage, which we're going to read right now. And it is kind of.
Mm-hmm.
For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey when God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God. That is kind of...
Yeah, yes.
I don't know. I haven't really delved into Peter's writings much, but this is kind of a mystery to me.
Oh yeah. Now the little dots. I'm going to go back. I highlighted something. I'll read what the dots in the passage of the book kind of had filled in here, because it says for Christ, and I'm reading the ESV. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as removal of the dirt from the body, meaning just a physical cleaning, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and the powers having been subjected to him.
Wow. Okay.
So that's
that
little
kind of
little more
bit
there.
More light there.
But again, this is part of the important part. What it says here, the early church. So when we read something or hear something, sometimes it's helpful for us to look back and see, well, how did the early church think about this? And the early church here is receiving a letter from Peter. I mean, that's
pretty early.
This is pretty early church.
Yeah.
And I think that's when people talk about, when they if you ever hear somebody talk about tradition, as Christians, we should think biblical tradition, early church Acts tradition, rather than the tradition of our church that is a couple hundred years old, maybe, or even sometimes less than that. But he says the early church interpreted the story of Noah in all the Old Testament scriptures, for that matter, within the context of the prism of the story of Jesus Christ. For the Christian, whatever is said about God on the basis of the flood narrative or any other biblical text must be consonant with what we believe to be the case about God on the basis of Jesus' words and works. So in other words, they're not in conflict. And that's the big part of what he discusses here, is that if we're not careful, we'll just flip into a conflict when there really is none. Christian tradition has throughout its history tended to endorse this Christocentric or Christonormative approach to understanding the nature and character of God. Again, they're three in one. They are triune. I think that is where we have to never lose sight of that and start going, well, they're separate people. It's the Old Testament angry God the Father, New Testament loving Jesus the Son, or God the Son, and he overthrows the Father. No, none of that. That's ridiculous, and not even the heretics of the New Testament churches were proclaiming such as that. They just out and out just rejected that Jesus was God in general. They didn't go so far as to say that he was God and a different God. That's new to us in this day and age. When you look at this, and I think this is really where. So we've got this first step of how, in answering that question, you have to look at what the early church said there in 1 Peter. And the second thing that he talks about is recognizing the flood is presented in Genesis as an act of divine wrath and judgment against human sin. This is found in Genesis 6, 5, and 7. And here I really made emphasis on this one. I bracketed it and put a star. Really important stuff. It would be erroneous, though, to assume simply that the God of the Old Testament is a God of wrath, while the God of the New Testament is a God of love, and that's what I just was mentioning. Right. A significant part of the problem, in fact, occurs when we contrast wrath over against love as though they were opposites. And then I want to talk to you about this. This is good. On the contrary, a better term of opposition to love is apathy. And I've heard that before, but haven't heard it in a long time. When I say long, in decades. So what are your thoughts about thinking about that as the opposition, that wrath is not opposite of love, apathy is? Right,
yeah. I loved that, because you get the picture of God in the Old Testament as an angry, wrathful God who's just crushing everybody.
Yeah.
And you get that same thing here in Noah when he says, "I regret that I ever made man. I'm going to wipe him out." Yeah. And which is what he does, and then he kind of relents to say, "Okay, I'll save a portion." And he did pick Noah and his family, and some animals to save.
He does the same thing with Abraham. We'll find out as well. And he does the
same thing later with Abraham. That's why his wrath can't be separated from his love. That's part of it. God's love. And the term wrath, it says here, denotes God's deep, heartfelt love for us, a love that burns and will not let us go.
Yeah.
And I never thought of it that way before. It is tremendous.
Yeah.
God's wrath is just a pouring out of his love, and like, how can these people do this?
Yeah.
And but his love never ends. It's part of his love.
Yeah.
And it's just like with your own children. Your heart burns with love for your children, and especially I think your grandchildren, I think, are more precious than your kids. Apparently, but I've seen it.
I've come to find that is true. I will tell you.
But you never stop. That love just glows. But yet there's got to be a point where you say wrath, but you've got to have that point where there's discipline and for their own sakes and that. So, but this defining of wrath as God's burning love for us is just tremendous. And that really impressed me.
And this speaks a little bit to, and because this is always the issue, we have a hard time understanding it. Andrew said it so beautifully a few months ago in one of his illustrations that he gave in one of his sermons, that when we disciplined him, he was mad at us, and he was upset with it, and we were his enemies.
Yeah.
And it took him becoming an adult to realize that next morning or that evening when we moved on, and we were sitting at the table or in the room, and we never, even in the midst of punishing or disciplining, however you want to look at it, we never once looked at him as our enemy.
Right. Yeah.
And he said,
and
that's
now
how
he
God,
can understand
and,
that
and he
now,
says,
too.
God looks at us that same way. And I thought, wow, that is so spectacular.
Yeah.
We think about it in this way. I think it is, and especially it's always in terms of we are God's children.
Mm-hmm.
So we think about it in terms of children, our homes. I remember that the loudest that I got was whenever they would run for the street as little toddlers.
Oh yeah.
I would scream and I would grab them and pull them back, and we don't run the road. I know the ball went over there, but you can't just dart out in the road. Or you think about they're reaching up for a hot stove and you grab their hand, you pop their hand. Oh no, that's hot, and you got to learn about that, and you can talk to them. I always what steam is and those kind of things, and you're trying to protect them
Right.
from things that will harm them. The child doesn't know and is incapable of knowing without tragic consequences.
Right.
And that's who we are as his creation and as his children. There are things that we do not recognize as harmful, that we do not realize are destructive, and given to our own devices, and him never intervening and saying this is wrong and this is harmful, this is outside of reflecting my image.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's apathy. That's what he said. And so we as his children, we must believe that the Father knows better. And because this is a conversation not between mortal creatures, so I no longer really talk to my kids about the dangers of things. They're adults now. The thing I talk to them is, look, if you're not careful, you'll find yourselves in a financial bind. That's about the only advice I have left for them, is to continue to remind them of that, to be mindful, to take care of their financial business. But the outside of that is that the conversation we as humans keep trying to apply. I'm no longer the child, I'm an adult. I now know what my parents know. I now realize that I'm walking this pathway. We want to make that the same conversation we have with God. And we will never be God. The parent-child analogy to creation and creator by using God as our Father, sometimes it confuses people and makes them think, well, now once I hit a certain age, or I've been around the church long enough, or I've been doing this long enough, I now can decide for myself what's harmful to me and what's not harmful to me. And we never forget that in the terms of whether or not we are God or the Creator, we will always be toddlers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sure.
There's never a point on this earth where I now assume the God role and I can discern for myself, independent and apart from Christ, what is right and wrong for me. And I think
God is the sustainer. He sustains
It is
all of
his Holy
creation,
Spirit, yeah.
including us. Yes.
And so there's no point where I usurp God.
Right.
But that's what we're seeing. People are wanting to do that.
Yes,
So this love, I just love the way he crafted that.
He did.
So
Very
beautifully.
good.
I thought of the great hymn I pulled out earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, love that will not let me go.
Yeah.
I rest my weary soul in thee. Sometimes our souls get weary just trying to figure this stuff out. But we must yield that we are his children and that we will always need our Heavenly Father.
Amen, that's right.
This next one, and I had this pulled up. This is what was on the background for us earlier. And we have got to behave. I don't know why I can't. I got to behave. Romans. You need to go read Romans chapter 1. Paul paints a picture to help us understand the flood, to help us understand what Noah was doing, describes and discusses the wrath of God. So I'm going to pull the scripture back up over here. And we're going to get down here into verses And see, it's all the way through it. But I'm going to jump down here so I don't have to. As he begins this conversations in verse 18, I'm going to start reading from there. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking. Look at that, futile in their thinking. And their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, verse 24, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Wow. And he goes on, for this reason, in verse 26, for this reason, scroll. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They're gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Wow, what a group of folks to hang out with on a Friday night.
But God loves us.
And yet
he loves us.
Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they do not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them.
Yes.
This is what's happening with the wrath of God. And what he says here is this. He says in this theology of wrath that Paul puts out there, and so it's there, you got to deal with it. Paul states there's evidently a plenty in the realm of creation for all people to recognize God's eternal power and divine nature. It's there. But God's wrath consists precisely in the willingness to allow human choice to wallow in the depths of sin. Look at it. God's wrath consists precisely in the willingness to allow human choice to wallow in the depths of sin. Love divine, however, will not let us go. You see, sometimes if I'm a preacher and I preach a sermon, I end there, and I don't tell you, though, that Jesus died on the cross, and it was his desire that in the midst of all that, he still loves you and calls you and seeks you, I'm not preaching the gospel.
That's right. Yeah.
If it's only gospel that, hey, Sister D, good morning to you. Hope you're doing well. Thank you very much. We will let Tanny know that we're praying for speedy recovery. She's doing fantastic. Doing so well, we're going to go ahead and have that other surgery tomorrow. So that's what she's going to do. So keep her in your prayers, and we just love y'all so much. Thanks for dropping in. It's freedom's misuse of sin, that is part of this. Freedom's misuse inevitably of freedom, if you will, issues in death, and that's of course Romans 1:32 that we talked about there. It brings about sin leads to death, and I think that's a very powerful part of that. I skipped over a lot about this next stuff. Got pretty deep around Gerhard von Rad, or whatever his name was, but my close personal friend Gerhard, butchering his name. I apologize to any of his descendants, I enjoyed that. But I got down here that the crux of all of that was down at the bottom of 95. Is what I marked. Okay. It is a covenant, not simply with Noah. So the flood comes, and then he says, "Look, I'm never going to do this again. I'm not going to destroy the earth this way."
And so he's
he's
in some way he said, I'm just not going to do that again.
Yeah, let's do something different. Fire be good. The opposite, but the notion that again, and we'll balance this out as we go through the book of where does God fall on the hey, I'm going to make covenant. I won't do this again. That's the covenant.
That's the covenant.
And
that's that.
The rainbow in the
Bow
sky,
in the sky.
when you see it. It is a covenant not simply with Noah and his kin as the new Adam, but indeed with every living creature that is with you. Genesis 9 and 10 says that. So there's a beauty in that. In what, in very short, what Gerhard says is that a concept of understanding that early on he had separated the land with the water, and then the water back with the land. The introduction of the chaos of a fallen creation, that all creation has fallen. And I'm okay with that visual, that concept. But the understanding of who God is in this covenant, I think, is vitally important to us. So we want to be careful with that. All creation, it says, then, is cherished by God.
Yes.
And that is something I think that oftentimes we emphasize our creation in the image of God. And it makes us that, yes, we are more valuable, but it does not negate that he values all of creation and calls all of creation good.
That's right.
Or that he commanded us to take care of it. At the root of the covenant is God's recognition. I thought this was very interesting. This is on page 96 at the top.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you about your thoughts on this. At the root of this covenant is God's recognition of human weakness and frailty, even evil, with which God must deal patiently. What do you think about? Do you have something in that paragraph that you thought about, or what are your thoughts on that?
Where is that from?
That's the first full paragraph, first sentence there on 96. At the top of 96.
Top of 96.
You got the next part underlined, so you were thinking about that. Yeah.
I will never again curse the ground because of humankind. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, I was up there. That first sentence is what I read, and I want to know what your thoughts were on that.
Okay. I will never again curse the ground because of humankind. For the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. Mm-hmm. And this kind of goes back to what he said earlier about how here this is a portrait of God, and he's coming to understand more profoundly, it says here, and more sympathetically these human creatures. Yeah. I mean, he's learning more and more about us. Yeah. This was a grand experiment on his part. Yeah. I'm beginning to see that. Yeah. Because his motive for even creating us was for fellowship. He wanted a family to love and to be loved by. Mm. And so he's seeing how we're reacting now. Yeah. And
he's seeing what a hot mess we are.
He's saying, boy, but he makes that promise. Never again will I destroy all of humankind. Yeah. And we can take him at his word when he says that.
And so I think important for us to realize there is that in his saying that, in this covenant relationship he's building, is he isn't negating our problems.
No.
Or that we're going to continue to cause problems. He's simply saying, I'm going to deal with it now in a different manner. Mm. Not that I'm going to ignore it, not that I'm going to absolve you of it. I'm simply going to understand this is who you are inherently. I'm just going to walk with you now. And again, I the balancing act that we'll learn about in a few more chapters, I think is a good point there. But that's exactly what this is. It is and again, more so in the midst of his love for us, his profound love and his understanding of who we are. And he looks at us with great care. And I think that is and with great care, that's where the wrath of God kind of comes in there.
He made man in his image so that we might project his image to others. But yet, you may have a son who looks just like you, but he may not. He's not your image. He has his own way. Yeah. His own way he's going. And that's what God is putting up with us. Mm. Is that even though he created us in his image, we have a tendency to just kind of go our own way.
That's right.
And that's when we get in trouble. Yeah.
We have our, just like my kids have, all three of them have their own free agency. Yeah. And they do things, and it's been funny. I've given them, if they've become adults, and got two of them that are married, and here at the end of the year, Joe too will be a father, and I can give them advice, and I've given them advice and watched them do exactly the opposite. And this is the conversation that my brother and I and we're cut out of the same cloth, and it's
That's right.
And
But
sometimes we wonder about that same cloth, but my brother, his kids are adults as well, and we're laughing, and he said, look, he says, I had to finally put on the side that my desire and no matter how true I think it is, everybody just doing what I tell them to do is not how this works.
It doesn't work that way.
and he said, he goes, it is certainly not with my kids.
No.
And so, we had those moments where we get, hey, look, I think you need to do this. Well, they do something else, and they come and go, I wish I would have done what you want to do.
Yeah.
That's the same way God feels that.
That's
God
right.
continually says, Ramona, I wish you'd do this. And then you wander off and do something else, and you come back and go, oh, I should have listened to you. And he goes, that's okay. All right, we'll do better next time. That's how God looks at us. He's not keeping it to, well, Ramona messed up 3 times this next week. There's no tally sheet. He just wants you to come back.
I often think about my parents, especially my mother, with 11 children. And she always had advice for every one of us, and we always just did our own thing. How frustrating that must have been for her.
Oh, yeah.
But yet her love was steady.
Yeah.
Always there.
It didn't change it.
No.
And
she was proud of every one of her kids, even though few of us took her advice. Sometimes we did.
Or maybe some of you thought she shouldn't be proud of some of the other ones.
Look what he did.
Yeah, which in the same instance is really speaks volumes of how God looks at us as well. Because lots of people are going, why are you still loving Ramona? Shouldn't she be out of chances by now? And God goes, easy, buddy. It's good. So we find that in this great story of
it's just wonderful.
We have to recognize God made us in His image, and so though created in God's image, we human beings are also dust.
That's right.
I thought it was great when you said
that. When I read that, who I thought about? I thought about Hunter when he said, "What do you mean we came from
dust?" Yeah, that's right. You came from dirt. Yeah,
it comes right back down to it.
We are poor, finite, threatened creatures. Listen, and I thought this was beautiful.
Yeah. Striving
to survive and thrive in an often savage world.
Yes.
Oh, how beautiful those thoughts are. We're really dependent upon the sustainer.
The sustainer.
Oh, it's so powerful. So with that in mind, and I'm going to try to, I apologize, but we can come back and talk later if we need to. God interacts with creation in such a way that the interaction makes a difference in the divine life and experience. So that which we're living is vitally important. What else have you got there? Somewhere bottom of 96, top of 97 you want to share with us?
Oh my goodness. This second paragraph here, getting back to Amy's question in the beginning about why he let the... And here's what the author says. God too may have entertained second thoughts, but perhaps such an answer creates a new batch of problems. Can we really think of God as experiencing the world in such a way as to learn something from the experience?
Yeah.
Can we?
Yeah. See, they got to balance that out. Yeah.
Yeah, and it goes on, but God, and down here it says God's character of holy love, God's covenantal faithfulness to creation's well-being, God's intimate care for human beings, and indeed for all creatures. These things do not change. God is faithful. That is one of the fundamental truths underlying our Creator's covenanting with us. God's love is always there.
Yeah, that is that, and I highlight that. In everything, all that we've done before, leading into this chapter, those things He does not change.
It doesn't change.
He does not.
He's faithful.
And so everything we have to do, His faithfulness. And so I just thought that was fantastic. That little quote from Psalm 145. But it's just God's goal of leading creation to shalom, peace.
Peace.
And Lloyd did it in one of his sermons. He talked about that. I know my plans for you. I know from Jeremiah to prosper you.
Right.
And he says the Hebrew word used there in most of the old texts is shalom.
Shalom, yeah.
To bring
peace.
We think prosper
means money.
It means money. Oh yeah. And but it's really God's desire is to have His creation have peace with Him and to be reconciled back to Him. And it goes back to this very first statement. that he made about covenants. And this is a story about human rebellion and divine redemption. So this is who God is. And so what we're going to talk about next week.
Father Abraham.
Father Abraham, we'll sing a song, had many sons. That's what it starts off with there. And so we're going to talk about the Abrahamic covenant and really start to, get into this again. I love me some Old Testament. Hey, I want to remind you that our 80th homecoming is Sunday. And so I want to encourage you to be here. It'll probably be unlike any other homecoming. We're doing a little bit of shucking and jiving on what we do. And no offense to anyone who's ever shucked or jived, but a little phrase I like to use. But we're going to have a good time in the Lord is what we're going to do.
Yes.
We're going to have some wonderful food and fellowship. Pray for our folks. Got a lot of folks that are sick right now. So keep them in your prayers. And, it's going to be this will probably be the first homecoming since we've been here in over 20-something years that my wife will miss, unless she just decides to come on up here after having all these. Knowing her, well, I talked her down from coming to church last night, just 6 days after some pretty extensive surgeries. But she's doing so well, and just thrilled for thankful for all the prayers. Remember, above everything else, God loves you, and so do we. I've got to get some things disconnected here on the side, and hope I can get this pulled up. And but we care for you, love you. Hope to see you Sunday. Remember 10:30 Sunday morning. No Sunday school. Show up for Sunday school. We'll all be around. But we're looking forward to seeing you and fellowshipping with you. Hopefully have a blessed remainder of your week. Enjoy these temperature swings we're enduring right now. Had the heat on this morning. Going to turn the air on this afternoon. It's winter in Alabama. So but God bless you. Have a great remainder of your day.